My helpers, men in the middle and reptilian friends who support me, received some private messages with questions. Some were less important, EQ who really Hitler was, or about Area 51 I will save them for later, but most questions were about the next World War, and human reduction planned by the Council of 300. On the last council meeting the estimations were presented. What we expect, is terrifying for me. I were able to see the terror of many wars, but the estimations scare me. So how the Council of the 300 will reduce the count of humans? This are the notices from the last council meeting, sent to all members and employees of the committee. The nuclear war. Everything you read about nuclear war goes something like this. It will be unimaginably horrible. Everyone will die, or want to. The end. Well, hang on, we can understand it better than that. It will be the worst thing humanity has ever experienced, but the human picture will not turn completely black. So let's talk about the aftermath, not only in the following days, but also in the months and years to come. As you read this, please bear in mind that these are generalizations based on averages across a lot of research on the topic, done by the CO 300 think tank. So this is a scientific paper without references due to the fact that the references are in CO 300 database, which is not accessible from outside. Also, the initial part of this estimation describes some pretty awful things, bad enough that you might want to stop viewing. However, I urge you to press on, it does gradually get better. First though, by full-on nuclear war/Armageddon I take you to mean that everyone who has nuclear weapons uses them according to their worst-case strategic war planning. The USA and Russia attempt to wipe each other out, drawing in many NATO countries including the UK and France. Israel lights up the Middle East, and Pakistan and India go all out against one another. China goes after Japan and others, and North Korea attempts to incinerate South Korea, also lobbing a few at Japan just for good measure. That's a lot of warheads. Just how many nuclear weapons are there? 9 countries possess a total of approximately 14,715 nuclear weapons and the capacity to deliver many of them to their intended targets. United States 6,450. Russia 6,850. United Kingdom 215. France 300. China 280. India 140. Pakistan 150. North Korea 20. Israel 310. It's important to understand that most nuclear powers will hold a significant fraction of their weapons in reserve for second and possibly third strikes, so even in an all-out attack not all weapons will be used. It's also important to know that most countries have more weapons in inventory than they have the capacity to deliver to targets. Plus there will also be losses due to successful preemptive and counter strikes, and several other reasons why the actual number of devices detonated will be less than the total number of devices available, perhaps on the order of 60% of the total, or about 8,860. Not all cities will be destroyed by primary blasts, but secondary causes, like fire and plundering. Atmospheric explosions will destroy all semiconductor-based technology like smartphones, computers, TV, digital radio, CCTV cameras, and even some modern Geiger counters. Sadly, that means even after the launch of an all-out attack, the threat of future nuclear annihilation will not disappear. Perhaps as many as 4,000 unused weapons will remain under the tattered control of various governments and their military units. So even after an all-out nuclear war, the sobering fact is that the threat will not disappear. This will play a role in the years to come. A world turned upside down. When you look at the list of nuclear powers, a striking fact jumps right out: the vast majority of the weaponized states and their targets are located in the Northern Hemisphere. That has profound implications, as we'll soon see. In the Northern Hemisphere, within 30 days the casualty rates in places like the USA, Western Europe, India, Pakistan, China, and Japan could approach 40% from direct blast effects, thousands of massive fires, and the immediate social chaos. However, in the southern hemisphere the casualty rates will be much lower, perhaps about 5% in the first 30 days, primarily from the erosion of social control systems as everyone scrambles to prepare and protect themselves. That asymmetry, the fact that the northern hemisphere has been devastated while leaving most of the southern hemisphere nearly untouched by blasts and fires, will rapidly lead to massive waves of immigration coming from the north as survivors by the millions attempt to flee the initial horrors. It won't save them. Remember, just as it's illegal for Central and South Americans to enter the USA without permission, the same is true in reverse. A wall on the southern border would quickly become a prison as Mexico orders its army, police forces, and thousands of ordinary citizens immediately to kill anyone attempting to breach it to enter Mexico illegally. All pretense of fairness or international law would disappear within hours. Much the same would be true in the surviving parts of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, much of Africa, and places like New Zealand or New Guinea. They would all defend their borders and themselves with deadly force. It will be shoot on sight regardless of circumstance or age, old people, kids, it wouldn't matter. The human smuggling will change direction from northwise to southwise, and smugglers will demand high payments in gold from the rich US citizen and Europeans, without guarantee that they will make it alive. Many of the refugees will be kidnapped, sold into slavery, robbed out or even killed. 30 days later. After 30 days the global casualty rate will be on the order of about 20% of humanity, or roughly 1.5 billion people, mostly in the northern hemisphere. About half of them, 750 million worldwide, will die in the first few hours of the direct effects. The other half, another 750 million, will die from sickness and violence in the following few weeks. For example, in all of the major target countries, places like the USA, India, Italy, Germany, or France, to name just a few, there will be no doctors, no electricity, no police. There will be no law. All the norms of society will disappear literally in a flash. Snowflakes will melt instantly, it will be purely survival of the vicious. And as bad as that is, it's during the next few months that things truly turn to shit. The following months. Nuclear winter. The nuclear blasts will be unspeakably horrible, but many people will survive the initial onslaught. Instead, it's the fires and smoke that will eventually kill far more people through starvation and disease than all the nuclear detonations combined. Depending on yield, a single nuclear weapon detonated as an airburst, most will have a blast radius of 2 to 5 kilometers. Nothing within that survives. The energy is so great and moves so fast that you wouldn't even feel it. You'll be incinerated faster than your nerves can signal pain to your brain, leaving nothing but your shadow against the concrete. It's at the circumference of each blast that things get truly horrible. Fires will ignite instantly in a full circle around each blast over land. Anything combustible will ignite buildings by the thousands, trees, cars, gas tanks, everything that can burn. And that's just from one blast. Major metropolitan areas will be sprinkled with detonations intentionally targeted so that the fires they ignite merge into huge firestorms, by design. Imagine everything from San Diego to Los Angeles all on fire at once, stretching inland for 50 miles. Everything from Bangor, Maine south to Virginia burning. Much of southern England on fire. A third of Japan. Half of India. Much of Western Europe. Even places like Auckland, New Zealand will be targeted just to deny military refuge. You get the picture. These fires will kill at least as many people as the initial blasts, and there will be no one to put them out. They will burn for weeks until they run out of fuel at natural boundaries like rivers or are finally extinguished by weather. Worldwide, the fires will inject enough smoke and ash into the atmosphere to turn noon to twilight in the middle latitudes of the northern hemisphere. No one knows how fast the atmosphere will cleanse itself. Estimates range from months to several years, but what we do know is that it will cause the collapse of the food chains we survive on, for years. The northern oceans will likewise be devastated by the lack of sunlight, which will kill off most of the plankton at the base of the marine food chain. What about the southern hemisphere? There's an atmospheric region circling the globe called the tropical convergence zone, which acts as something of a barrier between the northern and southern hemispheres. Overall, it will prevent very roughly half of the smoke and particulate matter from homogenizing south of the equator. That will still be awful, but whereas in the north sunlight after 2 months may drop to 20% of normal, in the southern hemisphere it may be quite a bit better, and by the time you reach the southern temperate zones, it may be only a 40 or 50% reduction, not 80%. Bad, yes, very bad, but with care some agriculture will still be possible, albeit at seriously reduced yields. Fisheries will likewise be less impacted, especially in the southernmost oceans. They will still be able to produce a significant amount of food. Nothing close to normal, maybe only 25% of previous harvests. Badly injured, but not dead. Millions in the southern hemisphere will still die, but hundreds of millions will be able to squeeze by and survive. How about radiation? Few people assess the implications and effects of radiation accurately. That's understandable. It's a complex topic that has been so oversimplified by mass media that when you say the word radiation, people's minds jump instantly to mutant cockroaches the size of alligators, or flesh-eating creatures emerging from glowing green swamps. The radioactive aftermath of a large nuclear war will be a very serious problem, especially in the general areas of detonations and for miles downwind. For most of the planet, the background levels will increase 100-fold, cancer rates and birth defects will skyrocket, and life expectancy will drop significantly. But unless you were near enough to one of the explosions to receive a high dose, it won't kill you. At least not right away. For example, from 1945 to 1963, the United States detonated hundreds of nuclear weapons in the deserts of the Southwest, many close enough to Las Vegas that the tops of the mushroom clouds were visible from the Strip. Altogether, worldwide there have been 2,000 tests. Side note, there's a morbidly fascinating YouTube video showing every nuclear bomb test on a map over time. It runs for 14 minutes. Yes, you read that correctly, we've already detonated a couple thousand nukes, about a third of them as atmospheric explosions. The difference is it was done over, or under, sand or water where nothing can burn. Of much greater concern will be whatever remains of the world's 100+ nuclear power plants. It's likely that they will be targets themselves, further increasing the total background radiation and definitely poisoning hundreds of square miles downwind of each. Even the ones that remain intact will shut down, and then be subject to gradual leaks of radiation for a long time as their containment buildings degrade and neutron flux weakens the primary reactor housings. Even worse, almost all spent fuel for each reactor in most countries has been stored on-site awaiting a more permanent solution. These are still radioactive, and are kept in spent fuel storage ponds, safe within deep swimming pool-like structures filled with water. With no one around to maintain them, the protective water will evaporate and they too will slowly begin to leak radiation. The cumulative effect from the bombs and leaking reactors will increase the overall average radiation most survivors are exposed to by a factor of 100, or more in many cases. Some isotopes decay very fast, others are very long-lasting. The net effect will be greatly increased cancer rates over the years and decades to come, and a significant reduction in life expectancy by an average of 10 to 15 years. What about survivalists, the preppers, how will they make out? A few of the very best prepared will do okay, maybe about 1%, but most will be as screwed as the rest of humanity. It will just take a little longer. The thing about most preppers is, they tend to emphasize preparedness in the areas of their personal fascinations in life, while simultaneously neglecting things that don't interest them. I actually met a family of survivalists 3 years ago when I was in the USA, and it was a fascinating study in tunnel vision. The head of the family is a weapons expert and a proud gun owner. After I was sworn to secrecy, he and his 3 grown sons showed me their bug-out facility. Chests puffed, they proudly displayed a frightening collection of firearms and ammunition, and explained in great detail how they had trained the entire family, kids included, how to shoot anything approaching their facility, aiming withering fire from various exposed portals of their mostly underground deep woods hideout. But when I asked about respirators against the smoke, and emergency oxygen tanks as the massive fire swept through the forest, all I got was blank stares. Likewise when they proudly showed me their 2,500-gallon water tank. I asked if they had drilled a well, and how they planned to extract and filter water once the tank ran dry. Nothing. The same when I asked if they had a Geiger counter, or medical reference textbooks. Nada. And the same when I asked if they knew how to set a broken leg, or which antibiotic to use for a toothache, or a lung infection. Finally, when I asked just how long they thought their little group of 6 adults and 5 kids would have the stamina to hold out against hundreds of survivors from the big city, who would also be armed to the teeth, amidst nervous looks they again assured me of the effectiveness of their arsenal. And just to vent some of that building testosterone, they blasted off a couple of 100 rounds in a frustrated ejaculation by gunpowder. The reality is that most survivalists use preparedness as a justification to pursue personal obsessions in magnified ways. In those specific areas they are well prepared, but in vital but boring things they are as ill-equipped as any of us. Case in point, in areas requiring advanced skills, such as medicine, energy, or agriculture, they simply ignore all the problems they can't answer, as if no one will get sick or shot. Machines miraculously run forever and crops practically grow themselves. That said, true survivalists know better. These are people who have prepared comprehensively and deeply across the entire spectrum of needs, people who realize that a dozen members is not enough, and have created much larger groups with diverse skills. Unless a nuke drops within 10 miles, they actually do stand a pretty good chance of emerging a few years later. And make no mistake, it will take several years for the sky to clear enough for agriculture to resume without special assistance. Recovery. How many will make it past the first few years is anyone's guess, but here are some very round numbers expressed as 5-year survivor percentages. North America, 3%. Central America, 42%. South America, 51%. Western Europe, 8%. Eastern Europe, including Russia, 5%. Middle East, 19%. Africa, 42%. China, 19%. India, 20%. Southeast Asia, 32%. Australia/Oceania, 45%. Note that these are extremely approximate guesstimates. Numerous factors could make the survival rates higher or much lower, including time of year, how many warheads actually detonate, variations in targeting philosophies, military, civilian, both, human resiliency, national and personal preparedness, weather conditions, and a lot else. For example, for North America the 5-year survival might be as high as 8% or 10%, or as low as 1% or 2%. The numbers above are to provide a sense of magnitude. They are nothing more than our best guesses, taking into account current levels of industrialization, social systems, and a lot of other factors. Disease alone will become a major killer, as will contaminated water. With countless millions of unburied bodies, people, cows, cats, you name it, a laundry list of deadly bacteria will make a massive comeback. That bacterial blossom alone will kill a few 100 million before eventually extinguishing itself after a couple years, because the bodies decay to the point that they are no longer a bacterial food source. There will be no vaccines anymore. Drug stores will be plundered in no time. A genetically engineered measles virus released after the war would kill most unvaccinated people, reducing the humanity to the desired 500 million. Many refugees will carry and spread the virus into southern hemisphere. The bottom line: somewhere between 50% and 80% of humanity will die from the direct effects of nuclear war. Further causalities are expected from the virus, and the bulk of the world's surviving population will inhabit the southern hemisphere 5 years later. This will be beyond horrible, but it will not be anywhere close to an extinction. So what then? Very gradually the remaining vestiges of governments and their shredded military or the Council of 300 members will begin to restore a crude sort of order. The first bits of civil organization and recovery will occur with a year, but there won't be the resources to do much. Governments in most northern hemisphere countries will be forced by cynical pragmatism to wait until the number of survivors drops to something they can manage. Since some countries are already under the influence of Council of the 300, and all members will of course be safe in their private bunkers with their families and servants, it may lead to another conflicts between the CO 300 members and the remains of the governments. CO 300 will come back after nuclear radiation is not dangerous anymore, and take over the countries, helping the survivors with food, water, and a safe place to stay, restoring the law. This ensure the thankfulness of humans to them, and use them to conquer all countries without the CO 300 influence. There will still be many problems, like food, or high criminal rate. Human ingenuity will counter some of these problems. For example, even if sunlight is only 50% of normal after 6 months, the clever use of mirrors to illuminate greenhouses will help small but significant bands of people to survive. Everything will be under martial law for many years to come. It will take a generation or two before people see any kind of municipal restoration, even things as basic as running water or electricity, let alone hospitals. But recovery will come. Agriculture will return, science will not forget how to make antibiotics, very little knowledge will be lost. The nuclear power plants will be entombed. Children will be born, educated, and new engineers and doctors will graduate. Manufacturing will return. Eventually we'll even see the internet reborn, and yes, it will have stupid and funny videos again. Gradually over the next 50 to 75 years the world will mostly recover. Unfortunately, it will continue to live under the threat of further nuclear exchanges. Maybe, just maybe, then at last we can all agree to get rid of the damn things, once and forever. And finally, no doubt this video will trigger criticisms, questions, and comments, mostly about people's specific circumstances. Let me anticipate some of them. Yes, it's possible you will be in an area that suffers no direct blast effects and does not burn. Yes, it's possible you'll be able to scavenge successfully for enough years to survive. And yes, it's possible you'll be able to defend yourself against the starving hordes. For all I know, you could survive 8 years on 1,000 cases of camel soup jam-packed in a tornado shelter. Humans are astonishingly resourceful, some will make it through even the most difficult circumstances. But in the northern hemisphere most will not. And that's just the point, any of these exceptions are possible. This narrative is about averages and aggregate effects, not about specific circumstances. I welcome your comments. Let's hope the Council of 300 will abandon the plans to reduce the humans that way. But the chance it will happen is significant. The burned cities in the north will not be rebuilt. The radioactive dust that would be whirled up would surely kill the debris clearer slowly. 6 to 10 years after the war, the Co-300 will start with the construction of the megacities, far away from all strong radioactive contamination. All survivors will be able to find shelter there. Life outside the rectangular and mostly underground megacities will be forbidden. They will be protected from nuclear attacks by defensive missiles, and will provide enough food production for all inhabitants. The hatred between nations will slowly subside. 80 years after the war, life will be more comfortable than before. If you want to know more, subscribe me.